So I was really excited, when Ivar said he could come. But when we last year in the last year's session, there was an interview with a lot of the kind of the founders of Agile who weren't at the manifesto setting. So we tend to like the upper room in the Bible. The snowbird off his room is often seen as the place where the apostles met. But there was a great talk around about with Dean and Ivar and others, just talking about what else was going on in the Agile space at the time. And I'm really pleased because I want to have a little bit longer to talk to Ivar, because at that point I think Ken France had interviewed you, Ivar, and it was just a very short piece. So I wanted to expand on that a little bit. The other thing is I'm loving Ivar's search for simplified or essentialized methods. I was drawn to the heart of Agile and the simplicity and heart of Agile, and we kind of run the Scotland Heart of Agile meetup. So I'm really interested to learn from Ivar. So that's my two big pluses today. I get to find out more about Ivar, and I get to learn more about his methods. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Ivar Jacobson, author of many books, and I think I first came across the name when I was contacting his Ivar Jacobson International for Training back a few years ago. So I'm completely stoked, and I'm going to hand over now to Ivar. Welcome, Ivar, and I'm glad you've got a coffee.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can get my presentation here. Can you see my presentation now? You can see it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
So this talk is primarily addressed to people who are novices in Agile, but it also, I hope it also works for people who are really experienced. One of the things I have reacted to over many, many years is that the most common way to teach software engineering at university level, for instance, is by teaching a very simple way of working. We focus on coding or programming, and the other activities that are important to do to be successful are more or less not treated very well. And the students have to develop some software any way they want to do it. That is the most common way. So we actually wrote a book a couple of years, 2 years ago, titled The Essentials of Modern Software Engineering, which is intended to be used by, let me say, newbies to software engineering in general, but should also work for people who are very experienced, because hopefully they will see what they already know in a new light. So I actually have an agenda. Why do we go for essence? And what is essence in a few words? And I'll come to the rest as we move on here. You're welcome to interrupt me anytime, or maybe only for asking clarifications, and later we have more advanced questions. So are we driven by fashion? This is a little bit of history of methods. The first published methods were in the 70s, and they were basically what I call a function data method. They separated functions from data. Structural analysis and design was one of the most popular. There were 50 methods already in the early 70s, at the least published. And then we came 25 years ago, it was all about objects. And then we got with components. UML was very popular and still used in big companies, but not as popular as for in general for smaller companies. In big companies, something like UML is used. We also came up with a fantastic unified process that later was very popular. At that time, it was okay. Let me say like SAFe today, if you know about SAFe. And by the way, Dean Leffingwell, who is the founder of SAFe, was at that time some kind of marketing director of marketing for RAP. Then we had CMMI. Everyone wanted a CMMI. I remember I was actually invited to speak at the CMMI conference in Shanghai. And the title of my talk was, "What You Don't Get from CMMI, Good Software." That was, of course, not, it was actually very well received. People laughed as they should, but I was never more invited to a CMMI conference. Then we got Agile, Extreme Programming, Scrum, Lean, Kanban, and more. And now it's scaling Agile, and there are many alternatives there. I mentioned SAFe, we have DAD, we have LESS, we have, Nexus. There are so many of us, Scrum at Scale, and we probably have about 10. So what will happen tomorrow? I think all these had or have something good. So that is really not the problem. See, what happened here? Okay, so what is the problem? Yeah, we are at the methods war for 50 years. It's unbelievable that a mature industry like us have a war. And this is not about normal marketing and competition. It's about more like a religious war where we get sects or similar things like sects. We have gurus and people who, I was myself a guru. I felt it was very mature that we did with gurus, and we still do it today. And another crazy thing or problem is that practice are like some kind of mini methods. We have user stories is a practice, Scrum is another, test-driven development, self-organizing teams or whatever. They, when they become more advanced, these are generic practices, but more advanced practices, they are locked in method prisons. They cannot be reused easily without rewriting them. I mean, even these practices, Scrum, for instance, is written in SAFe because it has to fit in the style of the rest of SAFe. And that means that they are not easily reusable. And we have a gurus, which is unworthy our industry. There is no common ground. So we basically, every method is described using its own style. Even vocabulary is not standard. Even very common words have different, can have different meanings in different methods, and they can also, the same meaning can have different syntax. I mean, we call something sprints, so we call it iterations, and the difference is not huge, if any. So basically, the only thing we have a little exaggerated is that we share the same alphabet, which is a little too little. And then methods are only theory, meaning you teach them, but when it comes to using them, putting them in practice, then there is not much support. The learning cycle is very well supported, but when you men move to really do the job, you don't get much support. I call this the Achilles heel of method adoptions. I've never used these kinds of words, talking about crazy things, until recently. I just got enough of this, seeing these things, and they don't change. So I call it the craziest thing with methods and some of the crazy things with methods and frameworks. So here, if anyone, I mean, anyone agree with this? Yeah, I don't think there is space for talking, so I move on. Actually, I've written some articles on LinkedIn about this subject, and it's got really a great reception. Thousands of reactions, not only to my articles, but also to people who have given feedback to them. And these the comments are really great. It's not just simple wording. So what I have discovered, or we have discovered, is that many of these crazy things will more or less be eliminated if we find a common ground that is widely adopted. And the methods war, instead of the branded methods, we will have an ecosystem of practices. So practices will become first-class citizens in this, if we have a common ground, and they will be available to select, and you select the ones you want to have and create your method. We don't need any branded methods. And the method prisons, well, disappears because practices are freed from their prisons and accessible in an ecosystem. Gurus, we don't need any methodology salespeople. A guru is a methodology salesperson. Trust me, I know it. It was the role I played when we had RAP, and this is the role you see of the most successful frameworks today. Instead, we want practice experts, and they will be important. Today, they are downplayed. If someone, let's say, borrows a practice, that the guru will, of course, give a reference and give a pat on the shoulder, but that's all. It should be much more. The original founder should be benefit in many, many ways thanks to the invention. And we put the methods into practice. That is what can be done. Thanks to common ground, if that common ground can be activated. So we have a good hope that much of this craziness can disappear. So the fact that if you look at all these methods, they are like isolated islands. They share a lot, but it's hidden. And as I said, it seems like just the alphabet is the same. It's very difficult to compare methods. You really need to dig deep and identify what are the synonyms and homonyms, and there are lots of other things that needs to be compared. It's very hard to move from one team. If you have learned one method, move to another team in the same company, for instance, where we use another method. So mix and matching practices, take practice for any one of these and put together to something is very hard to do. And there are many more things. If we get the common ground, then they share a lot. And this is not hidden, it's transparent. Then it becomes easy to compare, easy to move from one team to another using different frameworks. It's easy to mix and match practices. We get reuse and many more things. It's the opposite. So a common ground, a platform on which all methods can stand, is what really changed the whole arena. But it must be common, it must be something widely accepted. And I will talk about now the Essence standard, because that is designed to do what I've just talked about. So what is Essence? And in just a few words, it's a kernel. You know, this elephant, you look at different parts of the elephant and you will see different things. It's a kernel, it's a learning aid, it's a language, it's lots of practices, it's a thinking framework, it's some cards and card games, because that is very much used. So just to be clear, Essence is not yet another method. It doesn't compete with any method. It is supposed to make any method better. That is at least what some of the many methodologies now that support Essence. Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-founders of Scrum, says Essence is the key to success. Spotify model, one of the founders of Spotify model, is now working on designing practices on basically transferring the Spotify model to Essence, essentializing it, as we call it. Tom Gill has donated his practice, he called it donate his practices for essentialization. Scott Ambrose says, I wish I could get more. He has so many practices, so it's hard for him yet. We need a big ecosystem before it can really satisfy him. But we have about 100 practices essentialized, and they're not only talking about me and my company. There are lots of people around the world writing papers and doing this kind of stuff. So it is a common ground to be used to describe methods. So for the first time in our history, we have got a common ground. That was in 2014. The common ground, a standard, means that it can't be anything controversial. Hundreds of people from almost equally many organizations have reviewed it and have adopted this as a standard. So there is basically nothing controversial. It's very simple. If you look upon it from technical view, first of all, it recognizes that every method is just a composition of practices, mini methods, for instance, user stories and so on, as I mentioned before. It has two components, and I will talk more about them next. It has a language, which is very simple, and it has a kernel. The kernel is includes the essential things and so on. And it focuses what is essential. So it's easy to learn practice and apply them in the daily work. Essential, you know, if you read a method or book, that is much more than essentials. Usually a method, even a complex one. I remember that the Rational Unified Process was about several thousand pages, the description, and that says it was not, it was too heavy. It doesn't mean it couldn't have been agilized, but it was too heavy. Now, that if you essentialize that, it became, if I remember correctly, something more than 100 poker-sized cards. So the essence is really small. I said we guide it with modern user experience, poker-sized cards. I'll soon show you. human aspect. It has a human aspect. It's a thinking framework. So it's not only a technical, it also helps people to think, it stimulates conversations. So teams can, everyone in team can be empowered and engaged. It has numerous placeholders for conversations. We proposes for questions to be asked and space for asking more questions. And software development is enhanced by a set of serious interactive games. So the language is visual. It's very simple, intuitive. I'll show it in a second. The kernel includes the essential things to work with, essential things to do, and the essential competences you need. So basically, you can think about it as you have a starting point for describing your practices, your method. But it's very precise. It has, without you need to know it and see it, it has a very formal description and specification. I see it as, as a user, you don't need to see the motor of a car. You can still drive it. The same thing, you can use Essence without seeing and having to know very little about the kernel and the language. So this is the language to describe methods and practices. It's not more. I can teach it in an hour or something like that to a depth that you can use it. So a practice is a hexagon. And then it's described, a practice described in terms of activities, which are what you think it is, work to be performed. To do a particular activity, you need some competence. And competence, different kinds of competence that are natural, and they have different levels. So you can be more skilled than or less skilled in a particular competence. With these activities, you produce work product. That is, for instance, documents. And the important thing, and that is a new concept, is the key elements that you have to progress when you work. They are not touchable. If I say requirements, it's not a specification. Requirements could be in your head. It still exists. So it's these kind of elements that you have to progress from state to state to be successful. So that is all it is. And then we have patterns for describing other elements and their relationship. And you also, for instance, there are roles and there are principles. They are typically described as patterns. And finally, we have resources, external source of supplementary information. So here's an example. This is daily stand-up, essential. It has, as you see, 5 elements in it. And for instance, one is activity, hold a stand-up. It tells you what to do. And in the middle, there is an activity. You can see it going downwards. It's not really looking like the other activity, but it is a downward. And as an input, you need to have impediment, and as an output, you have work, and work will move to a new state. And there are references to resources. So this is what kind of people do we need. You see the competence there are at level 2, if you can see it. And there are 2 competence you need to do that, and you need to be at level 2 to do that, whatever that means. And that is, of course, specified. And then these important things you progress. In this case, is an impediment. And it moves from state to state, from raised to owned and resolved. Impediment in state owned has a checklist. In this case, there's only one item, namely that it has been agreed which team member should take ownership. Then we have two patterns. One is board-driven stand-up, and the other is round-robin stand-up. There are two different ways you might do it, and they are described also on a card. As you understand, these cards are not mathematically readable. They are just subject for discussion. Two teams can agree on that it means slightly different things, and that's okay, but they have something to discuss and agree on. Then you have resources, that is something outside that you can get. For instance, here, daily stand-up, there is a description somewhere of it, and so on. And all is available on your mobile. I think I have to move a little faster because otherwise it will take, I won't get to the complete presentation. You know, I have so much I would like to talk about. But here is the kernel. It has a number of different things. And here we are talking about these things that you progress. In every endeavor, there are 7 at the minimum, but at least these 7 things, and we call them alphas. Alphas are the most, you know, we talk about alphabet, and the alpha is the first letter in the alphabet. You have alpha humans and so on. We actually couldn't come up with a better name. And we have had, I will say, thousands of people have tried us to help us, but none of the terms they have found have really worked for all situations. So we kept the word alpha, and it actually works. So we have 3 different areas we need to progress in. We need to progress the opportunity. From everything we do is based on that there is an opportunity to get something done. We have stakeholders, and if we don't involve all kinds of stakeholders, we probably will build something that won't work as we think it will. Then we have another area, and that is where we talk about requirements. And as I said, requirements is something, it doesn't mean a document. It means whatever you have in your head or also in documents. And the software system, in many cases, actually, this essence is used for other things than software, for instance, for systems. So it's also used in systems engineering. And actually, it has been used for innovation, creating an innovation framework too. And then we actually endeavor. There are teams. From the beginning, a team is just founded. We are funded. We have money, but we don't have members. And then the team go and they eventually become collaborating. There is a way of working. The way of working is from the beginning maybe not at all identified, and eventually we get more and more understanding of how we want to work. And then there is work to be done. There are 3 areas. This is the second area. And we know we need to do things to be successful. And the standard, the people who have worked with this have come up with it. We need to have activities of this kind. For instance, explore possibilities, understand stakeholders' needs. These are not, the names here doesn't stand for a particular activity. We call these activity spaces. In these spaces, we have to have something to be successful. And so this works like a map. And when you look at the team, what they have and what they're doing, you will probably find they don't have things in all these spaces. And that is, then we need to fill it. Either we've identified and described practices, or we've tested knowledge, but we need to have something there. So these spaces include activities to move the alphas from one state to the other, or to create, to work with work products. Finally, we have the competences, and there are 6 competences in essence. We have 1 competence in the custom area, and 3 competence analysis, development, testing in solution area, and 2 in leadership, in endeavor, leadership and management. This doesn't mean that you don't need more. It just means the starting point. You should, according to all these people who viewed it, you should have competences in these areas, and they can have different levels. So someone in development can be on level 5, the highest level, and that probably represents someone who could be an architect in the team. I have to skip this because of time. A chord, then there are chords, poker-sized chords for these, and here you have the opportunity alpha. You can also see it as a dimension along which you have to progress. So software development can be seen as multidimensional. And here you have then 2 dimensions, opportunity and requirements. And you move here over many iterations. So it means progress to move from one state to the other. But that is done if you work agile, in iterations or sprints. So this is what it looks like. And here we have 1 alpha opportunity. It has checklists. And to move from one state to the other, you have to, you go through these checklists. And the checklist may not really be taken too seriously, but so you don't need to really sit and check everything. You can see them as defining a new state. So, and it's extremely practical. Checklists have existed forever. These checklists are not measuring if you have produced a document or if you have performed an activity. They represent real outcome. So these cards are used independent of which method you use. They are applicable for any method, of course. Checklists are very powerful. For instance, surgery, they use checklists. Just simple questions like, do you know who the patient is? And is it the right arm or left arm? I mean, things like that. So you don't take off something that probably shouldn't be taken off. So if you want to learn more about Essence, there is a book that published 2 years ago. This is not the sales pitch. We basically don't make any money on it, the authors. But we hope it's a valuable book for universities, and many universities are now using it in full semester classes around the world. I mean, several places in the United States, in Finland, in Sweden, yes, of course, and in Vietnam, in China, all over. What does it mean to essentialize something? Here we have from discursive text to essential active components. This is the old Scrum guide. There is the new one, and the new one has been essentialized too, but I don't have that here now. from 6,974 words of sage advice to 21 essential working parts and 21 chords. And this is about the essence. It doesn't mean that you don't want to read the Scrum Guide, but once you have read it or later, you still have the chords, and as you can see, they are, this is actually essence. I have a similar for Scrum. It's just a deck of chords, and you can bring it with you every day, easy, and so on. So here we have the Scrum Guide essentialized. There are to the left we have principles. They are patterns, and you have roles. They are also patterns. You have things to do, activities. You have these alphas. Sprint is typically an alpha. Improvement is an alpha that goes through 3 states. And to the right, you have the work products in Scrum. This is not my work. It's not people close to me. This is Jeff Sutherland's work. As you see, there is Scrum.inc is on the bottom of every card. So we don't believe that we should sit and interpret what other people are doing. We think it should be done by the father of the, or mother of the idea. Here's Scrum, for instance. It's also 21 chords, I think it is. There are other such packages: user story, use case 2.0, Kanban, test-driven development, DevOps. And here's a paper that Jeff wrote titled Scrum Essentials Card, Experience of Scrum Teams Improving Methods. So Jeff says, as I probably already said, but he said, essence is the key to success for Scrum. So now let's look at what an essential method looks like. Yeah, at the bottom is essence, and then there are practices on top of essence, and these are modular, so it's not monolithic. You can take one of these practices and just reuse it without having to change anything, and that works within an ecosystem. Essence is actionable. It is, as I said, a multidimensional thinking framework. Each dimension, which is an alpha, represents one key thing to take care of. And you move in waves. So here you have where you are after iteration 1, or start of iteration 1. You go through each one of them and decide which state you are in. And later, you have moved to other states. So it's still, of course, what it was. Every such call is an opportunity for conversation. Each state change is a place of conversation and guided by the calls. And there are many others such than this. Essence is used for game playing. Here's a game we play to improve retrospectives, the way you do retrospectives. And basically, it's a big piece of paper. You have on the x-axis, you are doing well in this retrospective. Or to the other end, you are doing poor. And then you have on the y-axis going down, you have you identify what's important, was less important and was irrelevant. And you put the chords in the right box, and if it ends up in it's very important, but it's we are doing it poorly, there is something to do. So this is something the whole team work together on. It empowers me. They really like it, working with chords like this. It becomes very easy. I have to say one thing. Chords is not a new idea. It has been used for years. What's different with these chords is that they have an underlying semantics. That means that if you work with one game and get result in that game, that is carried over to other games you play with the same chords. So it's fundamentally different from having chords that only carry syntax. The meaning of these normal chords is what you understand by reading them intuitively. I personally didn't understand, I must say that, until 2005, that chords could be really important in not only learning, but also working, doing. If someone had told me at that time or before that time that chords are important, I wouldn't really buy into it. I would think it's an industry like software needs to be more serious. But here, this is also a game changer to me. I was teaching 30 Scrum Masters, and they all knew Scrum. And when I discussed chords, and as I do now, just talking about it, they were very quiet. But to the right, I started to play a game with them, and their interest changed dramatically. They were all very active. There were top managers here, sitting here, and participated with lower level people, which almost never happens in China. And had long discussions about have we reached here and so on. So I will show you one of these games we play. And this is alpha chords. We call them playing alpha chords. And the objectives is to identify where you are in a particular project. You can basically go into any team if you know these chords, how to play with them, and find out where they are at the level that is almost impossible if they use a method, if they are allowed to use whatever method they like to use. So this is method agnostic. So first you lay out the chords. So you have stakeholders, opportunity. To the left you have state chords showing all the states that an alpha can go through. So this is only alphas in this game. These chords that have states. And to the right, you have the different states for each one. So one chord for each state is to the right. So you start by looking at whatever you have in documentation. So actually this game I played with many teams, and always found a huge interest between the participants. So you take the first chord of a stakeholder, go through each checkpoint, and you agree on, for instance, that these things are achieved. We have identified the stakeholders, and there's an agreement on stakeholder groups to be represented, and responsibility of stakeholder representatives are defined. That's important that we have that. And usually that's very hard to get because people are so busy. But if we don't have it, they take a huge risk. So that chord is all checked, and we have reached that state. we take the next chord and do the same thing here, and we move this to the left too. Then we look at the third, and here we find, no, it's not done. So that chord stays. And you do similar things with each dimension, each alpha, and you get to a level like this. So the things to the left are done, and what remains to get done is to the right. So now you understand, based on the checklist, where the team is to quite a detailed level, much more than if you just go in and try to find out where the team is by having a conversation. So what to do next? Well, of course, then you take the next chords to the right and move them to the middle. This is what you are supposed to do next in 1 or 2 sprints or whatever. So gaming is very important. I basically view nowadays software engineering as a serious game, set of serious game. We have many different things we need to explore here in the work. We have to discover what is there. We have to explore practices. We have to adopt them, adapt them, plan, check, and do. And there are games for all these areas to play. Some games are just using the kernel, and other games are practice-based. So it's different games depending on which practice you use. And these are just a small fraction of the games that are available. And the usage of them really dramatically changed how people engaged and get motivated. And the important thing is that the people who previously were the leaders in the team are always people with more experience, should always be people with more experience and so on. They still play a significant role here, but they are not dominating. They cannot dominate because there is a discussion going on. So one thing that we provide that I call the Achilles heel of method adoptions is live guidance. Thanks to Essence and the states here, the teams can be proactively guided, and where they are now, what they should consider doing next, and how they might do it. So you basically activate the kernel, and if you have practices, they also become activated. You create to-do list to drive and track their immediate work priorities. So if you do it manually, but of course you want tools to do that. So we have developed this live guidance into team with teams, and we have created developed a tool we call Team Space. This is where the sweet spot for many. Sorry, I have to go back a little. So basically, you have 2 cycles that you go through with teams: learning and delivery. Delivery is doing. In learning cycle, you have to discover what's available in terms of practices. So you can select the ones you want to use. You explore each practice, you adopt it, you adapt it so it fits your situation, your team. You plan the work, you do it, and check. These are the 2 cycles. We call it an infinity loop of method adoption. The sweet spot for many tools supporting agile management is the dashed black oval. It basically is only in the area of plan, do, and check. That's where the sweet spots for these tools, Jira and GitLab. The tools Team Space is strongest on the learning cycle, but also generate to-do lists, which are fed into, broken down to work items in Jira. So it's a very nice integration between TeamSpace and Jira. Normally I wouldn't talk about the tool, but since this is probably the only tool that has been designed to support this, if there is another tool, I would be more than happy to hear about it. But this is how we understand it today. So now imagine a future. You had all the best practices in best minds working for you in the whole world. Instead of relying on just one or two or frameworks, you have all the relevant frameworks in your hands. You have all the practice your teams want, need, and they are continuously updated by our founders and the community using them. Your teams get a tool so they can depend on competences, preferences, select the practice they need and compose them into a method that works for them. Your teams can explore and learn the essentials of every practice they use through game playing. So it's a much more interactive way of working than any of the existing frameworks that we know of, and they are the popular ones. And your team members get support, not just when learning, but also when doing the Achilles heel of method adoption. So this latter one is probably something that it's something we have not identified as a problem. It's not a problem that is in the mind of managers or people. But think about it. The learning cycle is very strongly supported by methodologies, the gurus of methods. But when it comes to doing, there is no support. The best support is you get consultants. But how many consultants are really good? I mean, there are lots of consultants, but how many are really good? Not so many. And those who are good shouldn't have to I was a little confused by the nice laugh, but they shouldn't have to spend time on the trivial things. They should spend time on the difficult things and not the basic things that can be done by tools. So just to explain what I meant, but there are not so many. The world is huge. We have more than 1 million people have been certified in SAFe, and a couple of millions people are certified in Scrum, and as Scrum Masters. That means that we have a lot of people. Of this lot of people, frankly speaking, the number that are good are not in the millions. So imagine you have an ecosystem where you have all these frameworks essentialized and your own practices. And the teams can select what they like and ignore the ones they don't like, and then put it all together to integrate it to a method and get their own method. I think this is what most teams would like to do. So we don't have to take more than we actually need. Scaling down these big frameworks is very hard to do. Not all of them are hard. Some of them are not designed to that. So Essence prepares for the unknown. I was speaking at another conference just 2 weeks ago, and they actually called the conference Prepares for the Unknown. Today, methods suffer from volatility. We throw out what we have every now and then you have to start over with a new framework. That has happened. I mean, it happened with RAP, and it probably has happened with many other things. And the reason is there is no standard, no common ground. So we cannot just in small steps improve. We have to go to something new. Uncertainty. We don't know what will come tomorrow. But if you have a technique where it's easy, you have a common ground, you can easily add new things and go very far. Of course, someday, even a standard will change. Actually, it is changing all the time. And maybe one day something comes that doesn't cover what we have today. But at least at that time, we have one platform, and it's easier to move from one platform instead of moving from all the different frameworks we have today. We have a lack of modularity. It's hard to get reuse, and lack of preciseness. The methods are not very precise. They don't stand on formal ground, which means it's very hard to move from to engineering. So we continue with being more of a craft than an engineering discipline. Finally, what is happening around the world? Well, there are more than 10 universities already teaching Essence as a full semester. Pekka Abrahamsson in Finland says, my software engineering education in the future will be driven by Essence. Then there is a forum with more than 60 university professors to promote Essence. And if you're academic and interested in that, please join that forum. These are the two books. The book is translated to Japanese and actually to some other language, but I don't have it. In the industry, we have several case studies, and one of the more important is from Hapag-Lloyd, a shipping company that have used Essence to essentialize their existing methods, and they are very happy with. Jeff Sutherland says more than 50% of Scrum implementations fail to deliver and so on. But he says Essence is the key to driving success. He is not the only one, as I mentioned. We have Scott Ambler and Spotify model, Tom Gilb. There is about had more than a handful of well-known people that now are using Essence as a platform. So I'm afraid I had too much ambitions to tell too much.
Well,
Yeah,
no, it was really good. I didn't want to speed you up because it's all online. We're all a bit flexible. I must admit I found that really interesting. Great fan of Tom Guild. Met Tom Guild 20 years ago, and I love the concept of putting these things down into these patterns, and then having these patterns available, and to mix and match. Absolutely adore everything you've said. Has anyone got any questions for Ivar? Just we can squeeze them in now.
And by the way, let me say one word more. Welcome to send me emails, anybody.
Excellent. Any questions?
There's a question of what happens.
I've got one here. What happens when a requirement needs to go back, e.g. from fulfilled because new knowledge is unearthed?
Yeah, when you go back.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
And you can probably move quicker to the next states by adding that. And by the way, this is Essence is applicable to any level in the organization, to a team or to a team of teams, or to the whole organization. It's also used at CIO level. So it is easily used.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing to acknowledge is we always tend to think that coaching and teams go forward. I've often seen teams go backwards. New people will come into a team, new leadership will take an organization over. Oftentimes the assessments will go backwards, and we don't talk about it enough. It's yeah, but these patterns will reinforce it. I like that. It's a reinforcing pattern. I like it.
Yes, they are.
Any more questions?
Please don't disappoint me. I think I saw Jürgen Appello here. I'm sure, Jürgen, you must have some comments or questions.
I think given the times of the festival, there's probably some other talks started. So I think people have jumped to the next ones. Yeah, I think Jürgen is not here now.
I would have a question, if I may.
Surely.
Cool. So you talked about your cards, so some cards having different levels. Are these relative levels or absolute levels of competence?
Relative levels. And okay, the thing is, the team decides, or the organization that deals with this called use essence will decide the meaning of a level. So we say, for instance, competent to do something. What does that mean? I mean, it's not mathematically defined, and that's the whole idea. It's a discussion. These cards work to discuss, and the team will agree. And if the teams of teams, then the teams of team will agree the meaning, and so on. Thank you.
Just on that, I've seen teams score themselves in various maturity models early on as being much more capable than they are, and then I actually like it when teams then rescore themselves as knowing less, because it shows that they've learned more because they now know that they're not as mature as they thought they were. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Absolutely right.
Good. Right. It's been an absolute honor to have you here, Ivar. I'm going to do some research, and the comments, the comments here have been great. If you'd like to, and I encourage you to leave some comments in the meetup as well, so Ivar can get those. And if there's any links you want to put into the meetup link, Ivar, so other people can see it. And yeah, I'm going to stop recording, and we'll get the video up in the archive as well, and we'll send you a link to that. But an excellent session. Thank you very much.